The unsurpassed, profound, and wonderful Dharma is difficult to encounter in billions of aeons. I now see it here to receive and uphold it, about to fathom the Tathagata's true meaning, to liberate all beings. Let's generate the supreme bodhicitta. Now let us begin our class on the Surangama Sutra. Today we're going to talk about the 8th aspect of the 10 pointing out instructions given by the Buddha, which is seeing is not separate. This is similar to the previous discussions as well. It talks about seeing the nature. In the Tibetan translation, it didn't specifically separate the seeing and nature. The Tibetan translation is seeing the characteristics. Maybe the Chinese version, the seeing nature is probably more profound. In the Vajrayana teaching, we often say seeing the nature of mind, or the nature of mind. Sometimes we use the term awareness in terms of the gnosis awareness rather than ordinary awareness. We have studied how to protect our awareness and rest in the nature of mind in awareness. But they're very similar over here, seeing nature and awareness. Once you can see it, the seeing, including the seeing by the eyes and the seeing by the mind, and the nature refers to the nature of all phenomena. Therefore, in terms of awareness, it is the awareness of its nature. So one has already come to the full realization of one's nature of mind. When we were studying the Vajrayana teachings, we talk about to rest and to protect one's naked awareness, the awareness that is without any obstruction. Whenever we talk about awareness, I think they're very similar to the seeing nature. Whenever we talk about seeing nature, it talks about recognizing the nature of mind. One should know that this kind of self-illuminating, self-knowing awareness, this mind, is not something that is solidly existent. It's not a thing. However, Ananda over here, he kept on thinking that there is a thing that is called seeing nature. Therefore, the Buddha used various ways to lead Ananda and to lead all of us to make the observation. The Buddha used various ways to give manifestation and to explain, to further guide all of us to see the nature of mind. Therefore, when we're studying Surangama Sutra, I think it would be quite beneficial for all of us, because you probably had already came to some kind of realization of the nature of mind. But after studying the Surangama Sutra, I think lots of your subtle questions that's probably similar to Ananda's questions would be resolved. For example, is your awareness inside or outside? Does it have obscuration? Does it have obstruction or without obstruction? Is it moving or is it still? So when you make such observation from various different angles, then you will be able to understand that this mind that awares, if we were to say that it is permanent, it doesn't seem to be right, because if it's permanent, then there is no rising and there's no ceasing. If we were to say that it is impermanent, then because it instantaneously will become impermanent, that makes this mind as a conditioned phenomena, which the nature of mind is not. So what is it? For those of you who had not made the observation of mind, I believe listening to the Surangama Sutra would not bring you much of the insight. But if you had ever made the observation observation of your own mind, even just a little bit of realization, a little bit of insights, then maybe your understanding could be similar to the understanding or realization of Ananda, maybe even surpass that of Ananda, since we've already encountered the direct pointing out instructions in the Mahayana teachings. Therefore, we could directly realize the nature of our mind. But it is difficult for us to expound it so eloquently like Ananda. However, from our own understanding, maybe the mind that we see is like that. It is not permanent, it is not impermanent, it is not solidly existent nor completely void. So that is why we usually would say that it is so wondrous, so inconceivable. In this way, we would be able to recognize the nature of our mind. Our mind, indeed, has all kinds of waves of the three poisons, but when you make the observation, you would be able to see that it comes from nowhere, goes to nowhere. That is why it is so wondrous. And for example, a great noble one such as Nagarjuna, they constantly would praise this mind or praise the nature of it using the word wondrous and to give such kind of praise. Throughout this teaching, this time I look through various kinds of commentaries. Many different masters give different teachings or teachings from various angles, but I believe it is just many different routes that leads to Rome. And when we study this sutra, I hope that we can look at this teaching as if we're Ananda. Now in the sutra, in the seeing is not separate, Ananda said to the Buddha, world-honored one, if this seeing essence is indeed my wonderful nature, my wonderful nature is now in front of me. If the seeing is truly me, what then are my present body and mind? This is a question of Ananda. Ananda has so many questions, and he presented these questions to the Buddha. He then asked, compassionate Buddha, could you please address my questions and resolve my confusions? And then Ananda continued to address the Buddha by saying that, yet it is my body and mind which make distinctions, whereas the seeing does not make distinctions and does not discern my body. The wording over here are different. Sometimes it says it's the seeing nature, seeing essence. Sometimes it's wonderful nature. Sometimes the word changes in the Chinese language to make the literature really beautiful, very flowery. But over here, this wonderful nature refers to the seeing nature. He said that now this wonderful nature is now in front of me, right in front of me at this moment. At this moment, Ananda felt that he had some realization. And then he addressed the Buddha by saying that, oh, now I have realized this wonderful, this amazing, this completely transcending realization. Then is this my nature? At the present moment, is that the nature of mind? Is that the awareness? Lots of the great masters in teaching Vajrayana teachings, they would say that if you do not think of the future nor of the past, look at the nature of the mind at this moment. This is the primordial awareness. In fact, in the Platform Sutra, it also talks about the same thing. So Ananda over here says that if the seeing is truly me, what then are my present body and mind? Well, in this way, this body and mind that is subject to the combination of the 5 aggregates, what are those then? Ananda at that moment started to have a certain realization. He started to question about the 5 aggregates, the defiled 5 aggregates, the conditioned 5 aggregates, and the body and mind. What are they? He then continued to say that, yet it is my body and mind which make distinctions. He started to say that the mind and body makes the distinctions, whereas the seeing does not make distinctions and does not discern my body. The true seeing doesn't differentiate the high and low, the big and small, doesn't differentiate such.
那这样的话，如是我心，你我今见。
He continued to say that if it is really my mind which causes me to see now, then the seeing nature is actually me and the body is not me. So he said that, well, now that I see today, through my own observation, I recognize that the seeing nature is actually me. This is the true me. But the body, which is the combination of aggregates, this is not me. As we've studied before, all the external things, all the objects are not me. And Ananda said that, oh, I've already understood that. This is my seeing nature. This is a great seeing, the nature of seeing. But then Ananda said that, well, if that's the case, I still have a worry. If it is really my mind which causes me to see now, then the seeing nature is actually me and the body is not me. How is this different from the question the thus come one asked about things being able to see me? Because early on, the Buddha asked Ananda, saying that if you are the seeing, then the object can see you as well. That was the question asked by the Buddha. He said that if you are the seeing, then the other things, you can see everything, and the objects can also perceive you as well, can also see you as well. In this way, everything would be quite chaotic. It would be quite confusing. So the Buddha refuted Ananda already in the previous part of the conversation that we studied about last class. So Ananda over here started to generate lots of questions. First of all, he feels that, well, the seeing must be something that is without birth, without cessation, and it's something true. And then it's correlated to the and then it's also correlated to the body with his discerning mind, which is something that has birth and cessation. It is conditioned. Then this too has some confliction. It is quite contrary. As the Buddha questioned him, if you are the seeing, then all the things, you should be able to see all the things, and the things could be able to see you as well. So he got really confused. Then what is seeing then? In fact, it's not just Ananda. We ourselves probably also attain some kind of realization and insight. And you probably also have similar questions from the angle of seeing that is luminous, empty, and it is unconditioned. It is without birth, without cessation. It is something that is unspeakable. But at the same time, it relates to our body and the 5 aggregates. How it relates to these are quite complicated. sometimes it feels like the luminous mind follows with the external phenomena. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it is quite luminous. There are various kinds of conditions how our mind would react in various phenomena and various situations. Especially those of you who had some insights and who try to protect and abide in this luminous mind. You must have felt this or had this kind of realization. Then Ananda over here asked this question on behalf of all of us who were confused. He said that, I only hope the Buddha will bestow his great compassion and explain for those who have not yet awakened. Could you please give us an explanation? This part that we do not understand. Would you please expound on that? This part is the question asked by Ananda to the Buddha. And then to address Ananda's question, the Buddha then answered him in two folds. The first is that connecting to Ananda's personal experience, and then analyze, and then help him to analyze. And then the Buddha asked Ananda replied to the Buddha. After that, the Buddha continued to expound and validify his answers. So in the next part, we will talk about the two other folds where the Buddha would refute existence and the other one is refute non-existence. In the next parts of the conversation, we will be able to see that the awareness, the seeing nature, you can say that it exists, and you can say that it doesn't, because there is nothing that is solidly existent. Let it be from the object, let it be from our mind. There is nothing that is existent as a thing. This is from one aspect. But if you were to say that it doesn't exist, it is not completely void. It is not that it is non-existent, because the external phenomena is not parted from you either. So if you were to say that it is completely non-existent, that is not true either. And mainly it's because Ananda feels that the seeing nature must be a thing. So he has to find out a way to validify this thing. As long as we can use a language to describe it, to pinpoint it with our dualistic mind, then he would feel that it is, he would feel comfortable with it. He would feel that it's something that he can accept. This is very similar to the now scholars mentality. Whenever we say that, oh, it is beyond our conceptual mind, if we were to say that, then the scholars would say that that is not valid. But indeed, that vast kind of realization is beyond our conceptual mind. So some of the profound teachings within Buddhism, some of the grand teachings in Buddhism cannot be measured by the knowledge of the now scholars. Ananda over here, if he were to manifest as someone who has supreme wisdom, such as Manjushri or Avalokiteshvara, then he would be able to understand the Buddha right away, and it would be like, okay, I got it. He wouldn't have so much confusion. But Ananda at that time, he had not attained realization. Therefore, he kept on asking those questions. And the Buddha patiently explained to Ananda, maybe because the Buddha is very fond of him, because they have a very good working relationship. Now let's look at the Buddha's answer. Previously, Ananda asked the Buddha to give him a teaching to further explain. But the Buddha, instead of telling Ananda the answer, the Buddha in fact questioned him further. The Buddha told Ananda,
其实这是一个应该是就是对他的一个对，应该是就是对他的这个问题，就是然后最后阿兰的一个回答就是先就是他就这样的。
This is an answer first, and then he would question. The Buddha told Ananda, "What you have now said, that seeing is in front of you, is actually not the case."
就今天的话呢，就是你这个所说的。
So he said that what you've said so far, that the seeing is in front of you,
就是在你当下的，就是你这个前面就是已经。
is actually not true. If you were to say that the mind is right at that moment, right in front of you, right at the present, this is not true. This is not the case.
就是这个不真实的，就是你这样的这个说法呢，就是不真实的。我们有时候经常
Sometimes
就是了悟在
we would say that, oh, the realization is at the present moment, and sometimes people would say that this is the mind, that's it. The first Dudram Rinpoche, when he gives the direct pointing out instructions, he would tell his disciples, this is it. What else is there? And in the Treasury of Dharmadhatu, Longchenpa said that this is right over there. How could you not see it? But Ananda is a little bit, Ananda's realization is still a bit different than the Dudram Rinpoche and Longchenpa's description of that realization. Ananda still holds on to a thing. Then it is not your mind, if you still hold on to a thing. And then the Buddha continued to say that if it were actually in front of you, it would be something you would actually see. And then the seeing essence would have a location. It wouldn't be that there is no evidence of it. So if you still think that there is something to be seen, then there must be, if you think there is a seer, then there is something to be seen. And vice versa. If you think there is something to be seen, that is the essence of seeing. Then it must have a location. If you think of it as a thing, then it must have a location, a dimension, or direction. It wouldn't be that there is no evidence of it. As long as there is a thing over there, then you would be able to point to it. There is nothing that you cannot point to it, other than a child of a barren woman or the horn of a rabbit. There's everything else can be pointed out. Relating to this, Mipa Rinpoche had explained quite in detail in the Beacon of Certainty. There is another commentary by Mipa Rinpoche. The essence of Madhyamika, which is not translated. This year I initially want to translate this because it is quite important. Last year, Khenpo Tsotrem Lodro really wanted me to translate it, and he supported me throughout my translation. He's really quite wonderful in that sense, and I admire him a lot. He constantly asks me to translate this and translate that. I admire him because on one hand, he doesn't have any jealousy. Because usually people would, for example, even the merchants who sell the groceries, they would say that theirs is better and the others are not good. But Khenpo Tsotrem Lodro, he indeed doesn't have any of those jealousy, and he would ask me to translate this and translate that. I'm not sure what he's doing right now, but he would collect certain teachings on the Abhidharma and sometimes on the luminous essence. But when I was translating Uttara Tantra Shastra, he supported me a lot. But I translated the entering the way of great vehicle without telling him because he has more interest in the bodhicitta aspect, but not so much in the Vajrayana teachings. Therefore, I translated that without telling him. Anyhow, in the Beacon of Certainty composed by Mipa Rinpoche, which has lots of the pith instructions by him, he talked about that the mind doesn't have any color or shape. It is not a thing. It is not something that is existent. We all know that. We all know that in our conceptual mind, but the true nature of mind, in fact, not many people understand it. Therefore, as practitioners, we would encounter the same problems as Ananda. That is why I wanted you to read into the memorandum of the preliminary practices, so that you will be able to understand how to differentiate the virtuous and the vicious mind and the nature of mind, and to each of the teaching on practice, you would be able to gain a way to work with your afflictions. There is a specific method of training in teaching composed in that text. It is just like some teachers, they don't specifically would scold the disciples, but some of them, they would directly point out the mistakes of the disciples. So over here, the Buddha very directly pointed out that if you think there is something that is the seeing essence as truly existent, then it must have a location. Why don't you point it out? What is it like? And then the Buddha said that now as you sit in the Jata Grove, now you sit in the Jata Grove, you look about everywhere at the grove, the ponds, the halls, as far as the sun and moon, with the Ganges River before you. So now we're sitting here, the Buddha said, we're sitting here in the Jata Grove. We can see these things around us, the garden, the ponds, the halls, and the sun and the moon, as well as the Ganges River right before us. The Jata Grove is a bit far from Ganges River. Maybe it's just a metaphor or an analogy, because Jata Grove is around the central area, and the Ganges River starts from Uttarakhanda. Maybe it's just an analogy. Anyhow, the Buddha said that now we can see the grove, the mountains and the forest, and then the shrine hall. Also, we can see the sun and moon, as well as the river Ganges. We can see all of those things because they have shapes and they have locations. Now, before my lion's seat, at that time, Ananda must be right in front of the Buddha, in front of his lion's seat. The Buddha said that point out these various appearances. He started to say that you can raise your finger and you can start to point out all of the different kinds of appearances, these kinds of things. You can say that, oh, this is a shrine hall, that is a pillar, and this is a flower vase, and that is a flower. You can point those out. And you can also say that what is dark is the grove, what is bright is the sun, what is obstructing seeing is the walls. What is clear is emptiness, the space, and so on, from the grasses and trees to the finest particle of hair. Their sizes vary, and since they all have appearances, none cannot be located. Everything, such as trees and grass, even as small as fine hair, all of those things, big or small, we would be able to point them out because they are things. They have shapes and they have colors. They have different kinds of forms. So if it is a thing, then it can be pointed out. Ananda talks about at this moment, he sees the nature of mind. And then the Buddha pointed out that if you see a thing, then you should be able to point to it. Just as the rivers and mountains, whatever is the object of your perceiving, then you should be able to point to it. And then Ananda said that, well, it seems that Ananda is mainly focusing on the inner seeing nature, but the Buddha talks about all the seeing things on the outside. However, they're not contradictory, because when Ananda went to the four heavenly kings' palaces and seeing all of those things, it was also the eye faculty. It seems that it was the eye faculty that sees. However, behind the eye faculty, the mind has to work, otherwise the eyes cannot see. Therefore, the Buddha points to all the things such as the Jeta Grove, the Ganges River, the sun and moon, and he said that, well, you can point your fingers to this, and then in this way your mind would follow. All the objects can be pointed out. And then the Buddha continued to say that if it is certain that your seeing is in front of you, then with your hand you should be able to, with certainty, point out what the seeing is. If you think all of those are the seeing, and if you were to say that the seeing is in this present moment, you should be able to point at the seeing. So now, where is your seeing at this moment? This kind of pointing out is very common in the Vajrayana teaching as well. For example, during the empowerments, there's the pointing such as, look at the space. Where is the space? Look at the front, the east, the south, and where is that? And then there are all kinds of poses. There are all kinds of visualization. Now you can go to the Eastern Pure Land, and you can go there with so-and-so ways, and your eyes can see the infinite worlds, and your mind could follow it, and so on and so forth. There are the special examples, special pointing out instructions given in the Vajrayana teachings as well. Of course, that is just for the very small number of disciples who are the worthy vessel. And for the common crowd, that particular way of pointing out is not permitted. So over here, the Buddha asked, well, since Ananda, you said that at this moment you see the seeing nature, then looking at all the objects and the phenomena, let it be near or far, this should be all in front of your eyes. Then what do you mean by your seeing nature? Can you point to it? Which one is your seeing nature? The Buddha then asked Ananda, if emptiness is the seeing, then how can it remain empty since it has already become your seeing? Well, if you were to say that you see emptiness, then emptiness is your seeing. Then where is emptiness then? Didn't you say that there is something that is your seeing? But if you say that seeing is emptiness, then where is emptiness? If a thing is the seeing, how can it be external to you as an object, since it has already become your seeing? Well, let's look at it from a different angle. Whatever you see, let it be flowers or vase. Since you say that you see those, then those objects becomes your seeing. Then what are those flowers and objects? Where do you place those? Therefore, with this kind of technique of debate in Buddhist logic, we can see that there is a big flaw attached to this particular view. If you were to say that your view is your seeing is existent. If the seeing is existent, then emptiness is emptiness seeing. If you were to say that yes, it is, then emptiness becomes your seeing. Where is emptiness? If you were to say that the object is your seeing because you see it, then where is the object? Because it's your seeing. And the Buddha continued to say that you can cut through and peel away the myriads of appearances to the finest degree in order to distinguish and bring forth the essential brightness and pure wonder of the source of seeing, pointing it out and showing it to me from among all these things, so that it is perfectly clear beyond any doubt. So the Buddha said that, well, now, you can cut through and peel away all of the myriads of appearances to the finest degree. For example, if you were to say that, well, if you think your seeing is emptiness, then where is emptiness? If you were to say that you see the vase, is the vase you're seeing? If you say that the vase is your seeing, then the vase becomes your seeing. Then where is the vase? So you can go through again and again and would be able to come to the accurate observation. After such kind of observation, what's the conclusion that you can come up with? Then you would be able to see the essential brightness and pure wonder of the source of seeing.
同比注，我就像刚才上面所讲到的什么日月啊，就是这个瓶子啊，就是各种各样的这个事物一样的，就是你最好是就是。
Because Ananda said that it is existent, so if it's an existent thing, then point it out.
很清清楚楚的，就是无有任何的这种迷惑的，就是给我指出来啊，就是你指出来的话呢
，without any confusion, without being vague, just clearly point it out. Just as pointing to the Ganges River, pointing to the sun and the moon. If you were to say that there is a seeing, if it's a thing, then what's the color of your seeing and the shape of your seeing? In fact, in the Vajrayana teachings, it is not that difficult to understand. It is simply asking, where is the coming and going of mind? According to the Diamond Sutra, it says that the mind of the past cannot be obtained, the mind of the present cannot be obtained, the mind of the future cannot be obtained. Therefore, observe the coming and going of the mind, and observe the abiding of the mind. In this way, you should be able to recognize it. So that is why the Vajrayana is so supreme. In the Sutrayana teachings, there's still a very long logical analysis and various kinds of examples and various kinds of teachings like that. But in the Vajrayana teachings, they are rather quite concise. In front of all the sharp capacitated practitioners, they would be able to get it right away. So it's just directly pointing out the nature of mind without coming back and forth with all kinds of logical analysis. That is why many people nowadays, they really enjoy Vajrayana teachings. Over here, the Buddha then asked Ananda in such a way. On one hand, we can see that Ananda asked the question from the Buddha, but the Buddha give him the teaching through asking questions to Ananda.
就是结果佛陀的话呢，就是让阿难就回答问题，就是这个时候呢，就阿难不得不回答，就是
And then Ananda had to answer the question. Ananda said, "From where I am now in this many-storied lecture hall, as far as the distant Ganges River and the sun and the moon overhead, all that I might raise my hand to point to, all that I indulge my eyes in seeing, are all things."
层层的这个路个讲堂当中的话，那就是就来自这个远方的这个
Ananda over here said that, well, from what I can see, the lecture hall, I can see the buildings, I can see the Ganges River, I can see sun and moon, I can see those kinds of forms, those kinds of phenomena. They're all things. Ananda then went back all the way to things again, because he said that because everything I can see, they're all things. They are not seeing. Just as whenever there's a really untamed child, if we were to take away their toys and then just ask them to sit there, they would still think about the toys still. So Ananda is still grasping onto things. And he said that I cannot point the seeing because they're not seeing. All the things I see and heard and all of those things I can perceive, they are the things that's subject to impermanence, and they are the external object, but I cannot point to the nature of seeing. Ananda continued to say that, "Oh, world-honored one, it is as the Buddha has said, not merely myself, whom am I, a Shravaka of the first stage who still has outflows." Ananda over here says that, "Oh, I am still just a very much of a beginner. I still have lots of defilements and outflows." But even bodhisattvas cannot break open and review. Even the arhats and shravakas and pradika buddhas and the bodhisattvas from the first to 10th bhumi, they still cannot see through the myriads of appearances and then point to a thing that is the essence of seeing. In terms of the translation, over here it says the essence of seeing, and sometimes it's the nature of seeing, sometimes it says the source of seeing. There are different kinds of terms over here used in the Chinese translation. Such kind of translation is very much based on the translator's particular style. Doesn't mean that this particular sutra is a fake sutra, because there were translators, and each translator, in fact, they use very different terms and they have a different style. For example, I remember that there was a great Terton who's usually not very good at writing. However, when he reviews a terma, then his writing becomes really beautiful in terms of the literary value and in terms of the terms that's used. But when it comes to translation, if I were to be very good at writing, then I probably would be able to translate Chinese into Tibetan language, in beautiful languages, in flowery languages, or vice versa. But if I am not very good with words, then maybe the style is not that flowery anymore. There are very different styles. In the Tibetan tradition, because there is a particular regulation and particular way of translation made by the king back then, therefore the translation is very similar in terms of style. Over here, Ananda says that even the bodhisattvas cannot break open and reveal among the myriad appearances which are before them an essence of seeing, which has a special self-nature apart from all things. So nobody could find a seeing that has its self-nature. Currently, it is talking about the refutation of a self-natured seeing. We have to be careful with our so-called seeing the nature of mind. Otherwise, we could be going to a master and say that, oh, I see my mind, it's very bright, it's so radiating. And then the teacher would start to scold you and started to say that is simply not existent, because as long as you think there is something to be seen, then that is subject to refutation. If that is true, then the world that's manifested by Vajrayana, the 25-leveled world, would be existent. But the 25-leveled world, in fact, it is also simply appearance without any self-nature. They are simply manifestation of the Buddha nature. If you were to say that there is a Buddha who has a nose and a mouth and then created this world, you are simply believing in the creation theory of the heretics. You may ask, well, how about in the Madhyamika Avatara when it talks about the Buddha nature? It seems that they also talk about there's something constant. They talk about how the Buddha nature is constant. But that constant is different than the constant, the so-called permanent and the constant claimed by the heretics. Because it is appearing without self-nature. This is really important. When we recognize the nature of things, we need to understand there is nothing that's existent. There is no self-nature. This is crucial. This is really important. It is simply form is not other than emptiness, and emptiness is no other than form. And that's the nature of all phenomena. Now, Ananda kept on holding on to a thing, and then the Buddha, that's why the Buddha kept on asking him. And then Ananda said that, well, there's even the bodhisattvas can't even find there is an essence of seeing which has a special self-nature apart from all things. And then the Buddha said, so it is, so it is. Now you understand it. In fact, there is nothing to be seen. There's nothing to be found. In the previous part, the Buddha just refuted Ananda's grasping to something that is existent. And in this part, the Buddha started to refute Ananda's grasping to non-existence. So the Buddha over here says that it is as you have said, there is no seeing essence to be found existing separately among all things. Therefore, all things you point to are things, and none is the seeing. The Buddha then over here said that, well, since, as you said, out of all the phenomena, none is the seeing. Which means, do you mean that within all the phenomena, there is no thing, none of the things is the seeing essence, and no thing is the seeing essence. The nothingness is the seeing essence. Is that what you're saying? And then the Buddha continued to say, now I will tell you, you and the dust come one sit in the Jeta grove and look again at the grove and the gardens as far as the sun and moon and at all the various different appearances. And it is certain that the seeing essence is not among whatever you point to. You can go ahead and review what among these things is not your seeing. Now the Buddha said that while we're sitting here in this Jeta grove, in this forest and garden, now we can look at all these things, even to the moon and the sun and the shrine hall and the Ganges rivers, all of those phenomenal world. Since you said earlier that the seeing cannot, none of those things are seeing. The Buddha said that we're sitting here and looking at all these phenomenal world. You're saying that none of these things is the seeing essence, right? Now, can you try your best to tell us, to explain out of all of those things, which one is not your seeing? Now the Buddha started to ask him the question from a complete different angle. Previously, the Buddha asked, which one is your seeing? Can you point to it? And now the Buddha said that, well, which one is not your seeing? Can you point to it? Out of all the Ganges River, the grove, and the moon and sun, which one is not your seeing? Can you point to it? Now the Buddha started asking him that question. Ananda must be really tired at this point. Ananda then said, I see clearly all over this Jeta grove, and I do not know what in the midst of it is not my seeing. I'm not sure. I don't know which one is not my seeing. Let it be the trees and the garden and the sun and the moon. I'm not sure which one is not my seeing. So Ananda answered the question by saying, I don't know.
他就有点懵了，就是有点迷惑了。如果这个树就是不是见的话，那为什么说是见到了这个树？
Why, if trees are not seeing, why do I see trees?
云和就是云
If trees are the seeing,
如果
then what becomes of the trees? Then where is the tree? Ananda must be really confused, the same as us. The same is true of everything up to and including emptiness. This is exactly the same kind of analysis. If emptiness is not the seeing, why do I see emptiness? If emptiness is the seeing, then what becomes of emptiness? So Ananda basically repeated the previous logic. When Ananda made the observation, he said that as I consider it again and review the subtle aspects of the myriad appearances, none is not my seeing. If I were to think that they are my seeing, that is wrong. If I were to think that they are not my seeing, that cannot be right either. There is a book called The Direct Pointing with Surangama Sutra. It says that within the world, whatever appears, they're just like a dream. So whatever appears in this phenomenal world, they're just like a dream. There is nothing that's solidly existent. That is exactly the same thing. You cannot point to a dream to say that this is existent or not. Just like the trees and emptiness, they're all correlated. In the previous question, it is the refutation to existence, and in this refutation, it is the refutation to non-existence. And then the Buddha said, "So it is, so it is." And at that time, the Buddha started to console the great assembly. He said, then in the great assembly who had not reached the stage beyond study were stunned. upon hearing these words of the Buddha, and could not perceive where the meaning began or ended. Within the great assembly, there are some of the Sangha members who have not reached the stage beyond study. They were quite stunned and very confused. They still don't understand the intrinsic meaning. Therefore, at one time, at that same time, the whole assembly got very confused and anxious. They don't know what to do. Saying existent is wrong, not existent is also wrong. Then they were in that state of being stunned. Their mood and their expression, their feelings are very different. Some of them probably got quite scared. And then the Buddha generated a sense of compassion and could not, and then the Buddha started to console them because they were quite agitated. Then the thus come one, knowing they were anxious and uneasy in spirit, let pity rise in his heart as he consoled Ananda and everyone in the great assembly. He then said, "O good people, what the unsurpassed Dharma King says is true and real. He speaks things as they are. He does not deceive. He does not lie." So there are the 5 types of speech and characteristics to his speech, to the Buddha's speech, according to the Diamond Sutra and so on. We're not going to get too explicit about that. And then the Buddha continued to say that he is not masquerade Goswami-putra with his 4 kinds of non-dying theories. The 4 kinds of non-dying theories, the 4 kinds of uncertainty is stated not changing, not constant, not birth, not ceasing, not existent, not non-existent, not increase nor decrease. We constantly would say that no birth, no cessation, no coming, no going, no increase nor decrease. They're kind of similar to it. Because in the heretics, they would say that, oh, it could change, it could also be constant, it could be born and it could cease. They would give the 4 kinds of uncertain point of view to confuse people because they're full of deception, as they do not differentiate the ultimate and the relative. And then he continued to say that you should consider this attentively. It is no disgrace to pity or to implore. What the Tibetan translation over here meant was that you should engage in detailed contemplation and do not give up the belief that the Buddha will speak truthfully. The Buddha will definitely not deceive you. The Buddha will not deceive the sentient beings. You will definitely be able to attain a good fruition. At the end, the Buddha consoled these sentient beings, saying that you don't have to worry, don't be agitated. Venerable Ananda would definitely progress with his insight and realization. That's what he meant. Let's stop here today.